All right, just backgrounds. I'm Ian McClure, Associate Vice President for Research at the University of Kentucky, and the current chair of Autumn. And this is, I will have to say, the most exciting water cooler that I've been a part of, not just because it's the coolest topic ever, but because this is truly a momentous thing that we're going to be talking about. And that is the passing of this CHIPS Plus Science Act that President Biden signed into law here in the United States this week. We're going to provide about maybe 10 minutes of some framing background, as I mentioned, but just a couple of comments about just this, this sort of momentous time and what this is. This is the first time we have seen something like this type of support for the tech transfer profession from the federal government since the Bayh-Dole Act. I think it's easy to call this the most transformational piece of legislation in the United States related to technology transfer since the Bayh-Dole Act. And so that makes this week a pretty important one. Just a couple of notes, one of which is you should know that that Autumn has played an enormous role in advocating for this and helping this take shape. I want to thank Steve Suzalka here, who's going to be talking in a minute, our board, and all of you. To be honest, I know many of Autumn's members have played a role in talking with their federal relations directors, talking with anyone who will listen, to be honest, about the importance of supporting the technology transfer profession and our capacity to do this well here in the United States. That goes all the way to actually conversations that Autumn has been a part of about the funding of tech transfer and what we've called the, funding the unfunded mandate. There are people that were in Autumn leadership and are in our membership that played a significant role in actually drafting early parts of language that have become Section 10391, including Steve, myself, Mark Saddam, Kelly Sexton, and some others who have been a part of those important conversations and drafting sessions to get this to where it is now. All right, let's kick it off. I'm going to pass it here to Steve. Steve's going to provide about 10 slides or so of some framing remarks, background details of the legislative language, and then we'll get right into open discussion. Steve, take it away.
Fantastic. All right, great. Great to see everybody. As Ian said, this is really a momentous time for tech transfer. Really happy to share this with you. Just one quick thing I want to mention. We are going to make these slides available, so don't feel like you have to write everything down. What I want to quickly do, though, is I want to walk you through what is the actual effect of this legislation on us. And so to do this, I put together a couple of slides just to walk you through this CHIPS and Science Act. This has had many names along the way, whether it was the Endless Frontier Act, to USICA, to a number of other competes. So let me kind of walk you through where we are today. So CHIPS and Science Act actually is a huge bill, and it's actually composed of three major components. The first is a chips and supply innovation piece, and that's what you hear the most of. This is the funding semiconductor creation here in the United States. That's Division A. There's three parts. Division C is actually a Supreme Court Security Funding Act, which is sort of the mechanism by which all of this kind of got put into legislation. So that's Division C. And since I went out of order, you could tell Division B is the one we're going to be talking about today. Division B is focused on research and innovation, and in particular funds a number of agencies that we work closely with, NSF being one of those. One of the things to point out is Division A is appropriated funds, means here's the money to actually do this. Division B, as you can see, are authorized funds, means here you are authorized to spend money, but we haven't yet given you the money. That's going to be a recurring theme. You've probably heard this already. All right. So in Division B, of that $170 billion, $81 billion goes to the NSF. And that also includes the creation of this new TIP directorate that you've been hearing about. A sub aspect of this NSF funding is Section 10391. That's what we're going to be focusing on today. This authorizes, and again, not appropriates, but authorizes $3.1 billion over the next 5 years to support technology transfer efforts. I've got a link here at the bottom, so when you get the slides, you'll be able to actually go through and dig into a little more detail on this. Okay. So one of the things to point out before we jump into 10391 to start with is there is actually a ton of diversity and inclusion initiatives in this CHIPS and Science Act. And so in particular, there's the creation of a chief diversity officer at the NSF. There are new scholarships and awards for rural and underserved activities, communities, and a number of other initiatives to promote diversity in STEM-related fields. And that diversity extends into also geographical and institutional diversity. So this is a nice broad bill that really is not going to be just making the rich richer. It's going to be balanced across the nation, which is exactly what we were hoping it would do. Okay, so let's talk specifically about the planning and capacity building grants section of this. This is that section 10391. All right, in this section, there are two types of grants or awards. One is really focused on capacity buildings generally, and another is focused on collaborative innovation or innovation research centers specifically. And so those are the subclauses in there. One of the other things we'll provide is the actual text to the language of section 10391, which should be useful for you to refer to as we go forward. Okay, both of these grants are designed to be 3-year grants with funding of up to $1 million a year. So, you know, up to $3 million a year. And again, just to remind you, these are authorized, but they are not yet funded, meaning appropriated in government speak. Okay, so who is eligible to apply for one of these two awards? The first, as you can imagine, is an institute of higher education. So your institution would be able to apply. They also cover nonprofit organizations that's affiliated. So this would be like a nonprofit foundation in the case of, say, a public institution that has a separate tech transfer foundation, and other types of nonprofit associations focused on technology development or entrepreneurship. So our members and their institutions, definitely on the higher ed side, are really in the driver's seat. Now, there is also an ability to have a consortium around these grants and awards. However, that consortium needs to have one of those two types of institutions as the lead. So again, that Institute of Higher Education or a nonprofit organization that's affiliated. Okay, so that's eligible entities. So what can you actually use the funds for? And in capacity building, and remember there are two different types of mechanisms here. Under capacity building, there are a number of different uses. And so I'm going to quickly run through these. Again, I'm going to share these slides with you, but just wanted to give you an idea of scope. And so, of course, it's quotes, so this is coming straight out of the language. So identifying academic research. But then, and you'll see as we go through these are things that I think will be useful for your offices at a much deeper level than perhaps some other types of grants that might have been previously available. And number 2 is a great example. This is ensuring the availability of staff, including tech transfer professionals. We're talking about money for staffing. We're talking about money for patenting and licensing costs. Ability to support revision of institution policies, developing partnerships and networks to transfer your innovations on your campuses into future products and services, and then creating seminars, courses, and other opportunities. And finally, create and supporting entities or competitions for entrepreneurial students. So as you kind of look through this list, you probably say, man, we do like 5, 7 of these already. Not a surprise, as Ian mentioned, Autumn helped draft some of this language and wanted to be sure that these types of grants would actually be useful to the tech transfer offices specifically. So that's the use of funds for the capacity building aspects of Section 10391. All right. In addition, there is a collaborative innovation research center. And that is, again, the same types of eligible entities. And now the goal there is to benefit the region. We're going to talk about this in a little more detail. And so here you're talking about providing startups and small business concerns with access to facilities, scientific infrastructure, and others. And we'll get into this in a little more detail. A good example of this is the YSYS system in Wisconsin and KCV, Kentucky Commercialization Ventures in Kentucky. And in addition, these collaborative innovation research centers are also for entrepreneurial training. So that's kind of the two main aspects of Section 10391. Okay, for reasons that don't make any sense to me, there's A, B, and then 3 in the legislation. I guess this is what happens when you've got a multi-thousand-page bill together. But that third aspect is, engineering and entrepreneurial experiences. So, again, you look at these and you say, man, this is what we're doing, which is great. So that's the use of funds for the second aspect of Section 10391. Just to round this out now, I wanted to highlight a couple things. So one is there is a section in here on reporting on commercialization metrics. And so this is an aspect, so metrics related to commercialization for an award under this section. And a reporting schedule that takes into account the short and long-term goals. Again, this is not designed to be a 3-year grant and then, we'll see what happens. This is something that we hope that this is something that you can continue to fund as we go forward. And ideally, there's additional government support downstream. Ian and I are working with NSF on what these metrics might be to make sure that they are valuable to both the government as well as to the individual institutions. And then finally, and this was an important aspect of our proposal, was making sure there was geographic diversity. So we have institutions across the nation with very different local soils. And so wanted to be sure that these awards are awarded across the nation. So that's a geographic diversity. So as Ian mentioned in a post to our membership, we really have 2 asks from you, and we can get into detail in a little bit here. But really the 2 asks are pretty simple. So number 1, if your institution is thanking lawmakers for the passage of the CHIPS and Science Act, and given that it's increasing funding for research, I'm quite certain that's likely the case, really encourage you to highlight this particular section. So that's one important aspect. The second is make sure you work with your government relations folks on how you can help continue to make the case for NSF funding. And again, it's just a reminder, these tech transfer capacity building falls under the NSF arm of this. So we're helping to not only advance the research, but then the commercialization of the research, which is what we're all about. Okay. With that, I want to turn it over to Ian, who knows something about regional technology programs, and let you take it away on this slide.
Thanks, Steve. So we wanted to include this in our background information here because this is coming down the pipe, and we want to make sure that the tech transfer community is on top of it and isn't sort of taken off guard like we maybe were with the NSF Engines program. right? The NSF Engines program, for many of you on here, I'm sure you're wrapped up in sort of, developing or leading one of your NSF regional innovation engines, which is an enormous program, lots of partners, lots of work, but it came a bit as a surprise, right? It came upon us quickly. Autumn was able to put together, fortunately, a water cooler kind of like this with TTO directors before it was launched, but that was only a matter of weeks. You should know that this Regional Tech Hub program has been a part of the Endless Frontier Act since it was first proposed. It has gone up and down in size. It shrunk down to 10 hubs and $4 billion at one point. But in this final published version of the bill, it includes $10 billion in funding for a minimum of 20 of these regional technology hubs. The goal here is very similar to the NSF Engines program, but if anyone has seen the NSF TIP team do its sort of presentation spiel about the NSF Engines program, they view this regional tech hub program as the next stage of maturation after its whole spectrum of development, nascent, and on, emergent to mature. Regional tech hub program is sort of the next complementary state of maturation as they view it. And of course, it's much larger. We're talking about $500 million per hub at that rate. 10 million, 20 hubs, do the math. So this is an NSF engine times 4, right? So, think about some of the dynamics here. It includes the EDA office regions. It promises that there would be at least 3 of these hubs in each EDA office region. 1/3 of those hubs must include an EPSCoR state. So there are 25 EPSCoR states in the U.S. These are lower resourced, lower funded states. You can find a map easily of those EPSCoR states and identify which are close and or tangential, contiguous to your states. One of the hubs must be led by what is defined as a low income population EPSCoR state, which is a state with no cities larger. I think it was 300,000 people. And there's only a few of those. So you can identify where those might be close to you. And then there were no key technology focus areas named. In early parts of the bill, there were 10 key tech focus areas that had been named, but the final version of this bill did not include those key tech focus areas, likely intentionally. So we only raised this here because this is something that we want all of you to be aware of and start talking with your vice president for research, your university leadership now, and start talking about how can I prepare my tech transfer office for this that's going to be coming, right? If you think the NSF Engines programs has diverted the attention of your office, wait until this regional tech hub program starts, because it's going to be an enormous haul and heavy lift and quite competitive. And we want to make sure that the tech transfer community here, Autumn members, are prepared for that and aren't caught off guard when the strategy and the information starts flying around. And we want to make sure that TTOs can take leadership roles in these, because that will be asked of them. You can bet. All right, that's enough on the Regional Tech Hub program. We can talk more about that after this, but we now want to open it up to some questions. We're going to cut off the recording here. We want this to be open discussion. We've got about 40 minutes. We want this to be open. Please stay on mute unless you're talking, but feel free to raise your